Hello and welcome to another exciting video around agentic use cases. This topic is one that resonates with a lot of NHS trusts, and I've been working on building out this use case to really amplify where AI and automation can help save time and energy. Let's quickly take you on a journey through the typical NHS complaints focus areas, not from a policy perspective, but just from the lived experience of the teams who handle these cases on a daily basis. What I want to highlight are the pressures, the friction points, and the technical considerations that sit beneath the surface, because behind every complaint is a patient or a relative like a family member or a clinical team, and a system that's trying its best to learn and improve, often against rising expectations and increased input. At the first point is the receival of the complaint, which triggers the beginning of the workflow. And complaints can come in all different formats. They could be phone calls, handwritten letters, primarily they're emails, or at least will be formatted into an email. And the very first challenge is simply figuring out if it's actually a complaint or not. Perhaps it's just feedback given, or a concern, or even a compliment that then turns into a complaint halfway through the message. And once this comes in, there's a scramble to confirm we have everything we need, or if anything needs chasing. And usually the first point of anything is to acknowledge the complaint itself. Now, typically this used to be resolved by automated replies, but generally they lack clarity or any structure. And at the very beginning, complainants feel like they've just been dropped into a queue or a long loophole of processing. And the next part then is generally helping with that through summarization and feedback, but generally it's finding the signal in the noise. Trying to make sense of a complaint can be extremely time consuming, and people rarely express their experience in a linear or structured way. They tend to blend facts with emotions, they jump between events, and sometimes they either leave huge gaps in the story or they try to influence the narrative. A complaints officer must read through everything and untangle those threads, and this is where consistency is key, but also accuracy. What actually happened? What's the timeline? Or what is the request from the complainant? What's actually needed to resolve the issue? Pulling together a coherent picture is paramount, so the organisation can respond fairly and also reassure the complainant that they have been paying attention and are attentive to the details. Then there's choosing the right path, the triaging section. Once a summary has been created, the team has to decide what to do with it or who to send it to, and this is where things get high stakes. Getting triage wrong leads to delays, there's miscommunication, or even missed risks as well. And complaints often touch more than one department, or they site in the grey area between two services. And what happens here is it becomes apparent that triaging becomes a balancing act between accuracy, urgency, and practicality. And during busy periods, it becomes harder to maintain that consistency that good triage demands. And finally, we get to the resolution, which is pulling those threads all back together. Once the case has been routed, the real work begins. Evidence needs to be gathered, medical records, things like emails, policy documents, statements, even internal logs, and each of these sources lives in entirely different systems, so there's a great deal of work into bringing all of the relevant information back. The team needs to piece everything together into a clear narrative. What happened, why it happened, what should have happened, and most importantly, what will be improved because of the complaint. This is generally where teams will often feel the greatest pressure, especially the multiple rounds of reviews before sign-off. It's not so much about writing a response, but closing a loop, and unless the loop is linked into improvement, the organisation risks repeating those same mistakes. When it came to building out AI to complement this process, we decided to leave the resolution part out for the moment, simply due to the need to connect into a vast array of different systems. So we wanted to provide more time for staff to complete this activity by focusing on the first parts of this process of summarizing, responding, and triaging to the right department or contact. So what we built was very simple. We took a trigger point, which was when a complaint first landed, which in this scenario was the more popular choice of an email, and that email would land into a shared mailbox, and typically the starting point of the manual process. What we did was configure an agent flow to take that email and first start getting to work. It first had to look at the email and the contents, and to then begin its first step. It would send an acknowledgement email back to the complainant. Now, in order for this to be successful, the email had to have certain things like human parity, so it needed to be able to feed back the key points to display attention. It needed empathy, especially for more serious complaints, and once these pieces were in place, it allows for better trust to be constructed between the complainant and the NHS Trust. It wasn't a simple automatic reply, it basically helps the complainant feel heard and understood at the very first instance, and this shows tremendous impact. The next step this flow will take is to create a separate email and summarize the complaint with more useful bits of information that the department might need. And one of my most favourite parts of this is the ability to suggest key outcomes or proactive steps in order to help improve the department. So it's stepping further into the potential of ideation, which can be taken advantage of almost instantly from that department, rather than limiting solutions from maybe like a lack of imagination. All of this is probably looking quite attractive. The last slide I'll show is this one. We need to be able to compare the manual process of this with AI and automation. So I've created a quick table outlining some of the key parts of the initial stages of the complaints handling and a rough estimate of time it would take to perform each part. Overall, there is a great deal of time spent, and this multiplies based on the number of complaints received in a given time frame. What's apparent is that AI will be able to reduce this time by about 70 to 80%. Now, the majority would be things like validation and ultimately processing, but other measurable outcomes such as quality and efficiency cannot be ignored here. The priority is not so much time saved, but the time back for staff to focus into the areas that need their attention, and this will definitely help in reducing the average time to respond to complaints and therefore helping with KPIs and targets. Now, hopefully this sounds great so far. Well, I've got a surprise. We have built such a flow, and I want to show you the experience right here. I'm going to start by sending an email to my complaints mailbox, and I've taken a common subject about smoking to help with constructing a very common complaint that might come in, and I've referenced my child who is the patient in this complaint. When I send this across, this will now trigger the agent flow to act accordingly. And to show this email landing where it should, here is my complaints mailbox to show the email landing right there. So the original email doesn't actually move from the mailbox. I still have a copy there. What will happen first though is my acknowledgement. And I've just had this back in my inbox so I can show that. And you can read through the response, and it appears professional, attentive, and it of course has that compassion and understanding, but without too much accountability. And this is very, very important for ensuring that there's no admittance or ownership until the complaint is actually formalized. And as a complainant, I have had my complaint relayed back and simplified, and I'm happy with the points I was trying to make and that they're covered. Now, that's part one achieved. Now, let's see the next part. In the email, it is suggested that the facilities and the patient experience team are now involved. So let's now see where this has progressed into the right department or departments in a plural sense. I've taken a look at my facilities mailbox, and sure enough, an email has just landed from the complaints mailbox with some useful information. You can see that the PALS team has also been CC'd in, so we can reference multiple departments if needed. But the real strength, though, is the information that's been passed across. I've got a summary of the complaint, I've got the key points raised, I've got a risk category and reasoning, sentiment analysis. Even if consent is required based on that limited information I've given, And then we've got the proposed solutions for improvement, as well as an estimate of time for completion of this complaint. And then just to help further, I've also included the original email transcript, as well as the acknowledgement email transcript that was sent back from the flow. And that makes up the current build and sets a solid foundation to then support the investigation side and help further. I hope this has been useful to see and you can relate to your own processes and AI journey. The last piece I just want to show is exactly how this was built, which is where Copilot Studio comes into play. A flow has been made based on a trigger, which is when the email arrives in the shared complaints mailbox, and then I can start the waterfall of events after that. The first section you see is the acknowledgement, where I run the email complaint through a prompt, and then I attach the prompt response back into an email reply. We have built in some fault tolerance, so if for whatever reason the prompt fails, it will send a Teams message to a user to advise that the flow has failed. This has also been built into the next part, which is the intelligent routing part of the flow, where I've used a generative action instead. A generative action is effectively a combination of the prompt with instructions and also the actions built in. So in this instance, I've fed it the list of addresses I need, what it needs to do, and it will then collect everything and send it off to the right department. The Teams message will be sent if for whatever reason it fails. It could be that an acknowledgement email gets sent, but the triaging part fails, and this is where the Teams message plays slightly different, which helps when manual intervention is needed at a different stage in the process or reintroducing that human in the loop. So to summarize, AI and automation will help to speed up the acknowledgement and triaging elements of the complaints process, and this is going to give staff more time to focus on what matters and therefore help to improve KPIs around complaint response times and also increase quality of outputs, including those proactive suggestions. I hope this has been extremely valuable, and of course if you have any questions regarding this, please feel free to reach out to your Microsoft contacts, and of course we'll be happy to take this further with you. For now though, thanks so much for watching and take care.